much for tonight. God, I thank you so much just for your saving grace in our lives, God, and just the power there is in what you did for us years and years ago on the cross, God. I pray that tonight, Lord, that you would use me, God, that you would use my story and my words, God, to encourage others who have walked similar journeys, God, or who are walking through tough things right now, God, that they can hold close and know, Lord, that there is hope in who you are, Lord. I pray that you would just bless tonight, God, and that you would be glorified. Amen. Amen. I feel so supported and loved, by the way. So I'm just going to read from this just because there's just a lot that has happened in my life, and it would just be easier to read than to try to keep my mind on track. My name is Destiny, and I'm incredibly blessed to be saved by God's grace and know what it means to follow and trust the one who knows my heart more than anyone else. I have a crazy story of what my childhood was like, but an even crazier story about how the love of God intervened in my life and saved me in every way. I would never have enough time to share every moment and way that God was so constant and faithful in my life. But for the time that I do have tonight, I'll share what I can simply to bring glory and honor to God because he deserves it all. The childhood journey begins. My mom had Huntington's disease for as long as I could remember, a hereditary neurological disease that over time breaks down the cells in the brain that are vital for cognitive thinking, moving, and communicating. Since my mom was sick while I was a young kid, I didn't fully understand why she did what she did. I remember writing her get well cards thinking that it was like a cold, yet the symptoms, especially over time, were much worse than a cold. I remember a few memories with her, like going to bed Christmas Eve with no presents in the living room and walking downstairs Christmas morning and barely being able to walk in the living room without stepping on a present. Every holiday and birthday, she always went all out to make those around her feel special. Over time, those memories were just that, memories, things that she could no longer do, ways she could no longer be involved in her kids' lives. My mom was engaged to a good Christian guy, but due to her illness, she irrationally broke off the engagement and married my biological dad when she was 19. She had my older brother, Ricky, in 1994, my older sister, Melody, in 1995, and then when she got pregnant with me in 1996, my biological dad left. Shortly after he left, she moved in with my stepdad, and they got married September 1996. Then in September 1997, my younger brother, John, was born. The fact that my mom married the two men that she married and broke off the engagement with such a wonderful guy is pure evidence of how much the disease was impairing her judgment. Although not really involved in my life, my biological dad was around from time to time, and we were told that he was our uncle. Since my mom remarried when I was a few months old and my family was never very open about things, I was living this lie that my stepdad was my real dad. My stepdad, due to the way that he was raised, was abusive, unpresent, and expected me as a young child to care for my sick mom. I do think he did the best that he knew how, but the way that he treated my family definitely left emotional scars that would affect every decision I made, how I viewed the world, how I viewed God, and how I trusted others for a very long time. 1 second, my stepdad would be in a decent mood, and 2 seconds later, he'd be yelling and screaming. I learned at a very young age to keep quiet, walk on eggshells, and just do what you're told. Don't ask questions and don't rock the boat. My goal in life at that point was just to survive. Since my mom was sick, dishes were going unwashed, kids were going to school without lunches, and laundry was piled up almost as tall as I was. Since no one was doing anything at a young age, I remember keeping the house clean, packing my siblings' lunches, and in order to try to keep them safe from being beat, I would get on their cases about making sure they did their chores. That just caused even more tension in my family, as if there wasn't enough already. I was stuck in life or death situations on a normal basis. One day, my siblings and I were watching TV. My mom walked out with a gun, asking his kids how to use it because she hated her life so much. Another time, we were at a family dinner, and my mom started choking, and my stepdad just took us all home and left me alone with my mom while she was choking before my eyes. I had no idea what I was supposed to do, and I had no idea if my mom would still live after this. Life was already crazy. Due to my mom's illness, my siblings and I would take turns switching weeks back and forth from my stepdads and my grandparents. Because I was the kid that took leadership when things weren't getting done, I was forced many times to extend my stay at my stepdad's because he depended on me so heavily. I hated it. I felt like I never got a break. Everyone my age was going to birthday parties with their friends, and here I was with no friends, trying to wake up every day and go to school as if life was fine and normal, and then come home, take care of all these responsibilities that many times felt like they were going to kill me. I grew up in a so-called Christian home, but at the time didn't really connect the fact that my family was far from following Jesus. My stepdad's abuse only seemed to get worse. At one point, the state got called, but all of us lied and said nothing was happening because we were terrified of the unknown. We were terrified if we would be separated. So just to recap, by the time I was probably about 5 years old, my mom was sick, progressively getting worse with Huntington's. I was moving back and forth with from my grandparents to my stepdad's. My stepdad was very abusive, and when I was about 12 years old, another secret was let out of the bag. My grandpa had been sexually abusing my sister and I. I knew it was happening, but again, I was terrified about what to do with the information. My sister told someone at our school, the state got involved, someone in my family told my sister to lie and say it never happened. And my stepdad stepped in and took it as another opportunity to take control and force my sister and I to move in with him. No one ever asked us if we were okay. No one sought out counseling for us. Everyone just dismissed it as if nothing happened. At the time, I couldn't look at things objectively and just did what my family were professionals at, hiding. In every way, I felt like I was failing because I couldn't keep up with laundry, dishes, and schoolwork. Due to all of the undealt abuse and trauma, I was left crumbling inside. My family was crumbling from their own years of hurt and couldn't look at things objectively enough to even question the amount of responsibilities I took on as a young child. Everyone in my family always thought that I had it all together. I compared myself to everyone and felt like I could never measure up. Everything was a competition. My grades, sports, you name it. No matter how much people encouraged me, it meant nothing because everything else around me proved otherwise. There was no way you'd ever hear me talk about anything that was happening at home. All I knew was to hide. That's what my family did. All this trauma was eating me alive, yet I had no idea. And honestly, I didn't want to see how much it was eating me alive because that just made me feel weak. I was constantly at the doctors. Ringworm, mono, chronic headaches, ulcers, knee pain. The doctors could give no answer except that I might be stressed. I remember journaling, crying, and just asking God why life was so terrible. Yet I held on to two scriptures, Romans 8:28 and Isaiah 65:17. Life didn't make sense. I felt powerless, suicidal, anxious, unloved, and worthy, you name it. But something deep in my spirit knew things would get better. Although life was difficult, God was always faithful to put just the right people in my life at the right time, just to show me glimpses of the love of God that I definitely didn't see in my home. I remember so clearly wrestling with how difficult life was, yet felt like I had no testimony to share with others because I was so buried in all of my own junk that I felt I had nothing to share. Life was hopeless. Looking back, I see how much God was instilling in me a desire to love and serve him at a young age. I remember talking to one of my older cousins who radically came to Jesus after she'd been in the scene of sleeping around, drugs, etc. I told her I wanted a testimony like hers. And even 10 years later, I so clearly remember her telling me, Destiny, your testimony is that you were kept. My mom passed away when I was 15 years old. That same year, God brought in a family that has been so consistently influential in my life. I had a million walls up because of the amount of hurt that I experienced. But this family never gave up on me. Even when I pushed them away, they were there to show me the love of Christ like I'd never experienced. I wrestled in high school a lot with feeling worthless and not being able to fit in. I took life so seriously because of the amount of things I had experienced. As if things weren't hard enough growing up, in high school my younger brother was in and out of jail and my sister was running off with guys she'd met on the internet. She'd be gone for days and we'd be worried sick, wondering whether this would be the time that she wouldn't come back. My life was out of control and there was no way anyone would ever understand it. That only left me feeling more alone, completely powerless, and as if I had failed my family. I felt like I had to live up to this role of being my mom, especially when she passed away. Due to the hurt that I had experienced, I grew very distant, strong-willed, stubborn, and independent. I didn't need help from anyone, and I didn't want it because I already was failed enough. Fast forward to my junior year of high school when all I could think about was what was next. I knew that I wanted to be used by God in a radical way and knew that I wanted to go to a Christian college that focused on discipleship. I definitely knew I wanted to get out of home. In September 2015, I moved from Delaware to New Jersey to attend Ground Zero School of Discipleship in Marlton. I genuinely wanted a deeper relationship with the Lord, and although I had no idea how this would happen, I wanted him to use my story for his glory. I had no idea what I was getting myself into when I left for New Jersey. Little, quiet, keep my life to myself destiny was in for quite an awakening. In Delaware, it was easy to cruise by in life unseen, not where I was going. I was surrounded by people, these people, who constantly were pushing my buttons, but also who were encouraging me where I was at. At this place, I met some of my best friends who have been so vital in my healing journey. I was terrified to trust people, so I was a huge jerk sometimes. One of them was my friend Marissa. God gave her an immense grace for me, or something, because no matter how much I pushed her away, she would just keep coming back, full with even more love. It's relationships like this that have given me hope to keep going. As life went on here, surrounded by a community of people who were constantly pushing me to be more like Jesus, it was extremely hard. I had so much pain and baggage that no matter how many million prayers of praying to God that he would help me surrender it all just started getting heavier and heavier. It seemed as the days went by, the more I was affected by all this baggage and the more my self-hatred had grown. I hated who I'd become. One of my absolute biggest fears growing up is that I would become just like my stepdad. I tried so hard not to become like him. I wanted to be someone who was evidently loving and full of grace, yet that's not who I'd become. Little did I know that God just needed to heal the broken pieces in my life. God used a lot of people and things at my time in Ground Zero to do immense healing in me. In the summer of 2016, God started stirring up my heart to really start walking through some heavy stuff. I remember the morning very well. I was sitting down and listening to worship music, and the song Out of Hiding came on. The lyrics go like this: "Come out of hiding, you're safe here with me. There's no need to cover what I already see. You've got your reasons, but I hold your peace. You've been on lockdown, and I hold the key." In that moment, I felt so clearly from the Holy Spirit that he was prompting me to let go of this pain I'd been holding on to for so long. The years and years of hiding and living in life in secret was all I knew, and I felt him clearly out of the blue bring back to my memory all the sexual abuse that had happened. I was terrified. I'd never told anyone about this. God brought this girl named Sam to mind, and I reached out to her, just telling her I felt like God was prompting me to walk through some things, but I had no idea how. We talked on the phone, and I talked about the abuse from my stepdad, but I didn't mention the sexual abuse. But just like the Holy Spirit works, he prompted her to bring up the sexual abuse that she had no idea about. For the next 2 months or so, I'd call her once a week just to try to work through some stuff. I realized it wasn't working because I could easily wiggle my way out of talking to her because of the amount of homework I had, or I was just way too tired. So I started going to counseling, and it was awful. Every time I left counseling, I felt worse than when I went in. I definitely felt like I was doing something wrong. This was before I met you. I just had a different place in life. Fast forward to February 2017, when I went to Guatemala for a missions trip. God knew exactly what he was doing in my heart back in the summer to prepare me for this very moment. One of the girls on my team, Kira, didn't know I was going to mention you, didn't you? Shared her testimony for a youth group, and she didn't hold back from what she had to share. She shared heavy stuff. I looked at her, and it challenged me to truly live authentically like she was living, so that God would get the glory. I saw the power in her speaking out things that happened to her, and I wanted that. Yet I had no idea how to get that because my whole goal in life was to barricade myself and not let anyone close to me. At my school, we traveled a lot to different churches and youth groups to share seminars, dramas, and testimonies. Somehow, I was always the one that had to share, and I absolutely hated it. Just ask Marissa. So, of course, when we went to Guatemala, I knew they were going to have me speak. For the first time in a youth group setting, I shared about how my stepdad was abusive. That was a first for me. A few days later, we would be going to a teen mom's home, and of course, I was asked to share my testimony. At this home, girls and their kids were brought there, mostly court-ordered because they had been sexually abused by their grandpas, uncles, dads. I left with a huge responsibility, and then they were left with a huge responsibility of raising a child that they had no idea how to care for. I remember the night before sitting down preparing what to share. God softly and gently just prompted me to lay everything out because these girls needed to see that in the midst of deep pain, there was deep hope.
That's right.
Here I was in front of all of these girls I'd never met before and surrounded by girls from my school, being challenged to be the most vulnerable I'd ever been and to speak about things only God knew about. God brought back to memory things I honestly completely forgot I struggled with, like an eating disorder and self-harm. By God's grace, I shared my story about being sexually abused. Somehow, I ended up leading a discussion after sharing my testimony, and I asked the girls how many of them were abused. 75% of them raised their hands.
Wow.
I asked them how it made them feel, and after some silence, like Raindrop, they listed out things: shame, guilt, anger. For the first time, I was sharing my story, but so were these girls. They had been living with all these other people, yet no one knew the pain that they specifically were going through. That moment was so influential in my life and showed me the power of speaking out your story, even if it's painful. By September 2017, a year after I had left for New Jersey, I realized the amount of things I had to work through with my family and knew I needed complete space from them. I sent them a letter telling them I wouldn't be coming home for the holidays. It was full of anger, which I'm waiting for the right time to make amends with them, and it wasn't full of very much grace. They freaked out and couldn't understand why on earth I was taking space and what on earth they did that was just so wrong. Lack of objectivity right there. I felt prompted to take space, and then due to my family's reaction, I felt like I was doing something wrong. Every day I prayed and asked God to show me how to get involved in my family again. He didn't give me the answers, and I felt very frustrated. How was I being a loving Christian, I thought, by not talking to my family? It wasn't until I started working through my codependency book 2 years later that I realized this was a very important step as part of the healing process, detachment. Jesus led me to do this before I even knew this was vital in healing. And all the questions I wanted answers to 2 years ago were answered in my codependency book after I had already went through the process. This Thanksgiving was the first Thanksgiving I spent with my family in 2 years. I now know how to set boundaries. I still want to sit down with them and tell them why I took space and apologize to them for the way that I went about it, but I'm praying for God's wisdom and timing on that one. I've despised the way that my family has become professional hiders, and having come out of hiding and seeing what Jesus has done, I so badly want for them to come out. I believe I have forgiven my family for the most part, and even when they didn't understand why I was doing what I was doing, I knew I needed to do it regardless of what anyone else thought. I didn't want to live the life my family lived, and in order to have something different, I knew I had to make different choices. In May 2018, I graduated from the discipleship program I was a part of and asked to stay on as staff. Here, my main focus would be discipleship and administration. The summer leading into the new school year was one of the worst. The more that time went on, the more I saw so many of my faults and how much I pushed people away and just treated them like trash. I wanted so badly to be a good friend, full of grace and love, but I felt incapable to do the very thing that my heart desired. The self-hatred I had only grew deeper, and I had no idea how to even talk to anyone about the things that I was feeling or experiencing. I remember apologizing a lot to people, especially my friend Kiara. We'd have conversations a lot about something I did that wasn't cool. I so badly wanted to be different and treat people differently, but no matter what I did, I couldn't change. Felt like there was no hope, and all the suicidal thoughts I wrestled so strongly with in high school came flooding back. I grew up in a Christian school, so I knew all the scriptures. People would always try to encourage me and say things like, "Children of God shouldn't be anxious. God loves you. You're more than the things you've gone through." Although I saw their heart, that just made me feel even more like trash, because the faith I was believing and claiming clearly was void because it wasn't changing the way I viewed myself or life. I just needed someone to listen to me and allow me to be where I was at. I didn't need someone quoting scriptures and telling me it was going to be okay. Wrestling with these suicidal thoughts led me down a very lonely road. I was terrified to talk to anyone about it out of fear of what they would think of me, how they'd try to fix me, or overreacting and taking me to a mental hospital or something. So yet again, I remained quiet. I remember the first person I finally spoke to about was my friend Veronica, and she looked at me with love in her eyes, no judgment, no pretty words, no intention to force me to be somewhere I wasn't. That was healing. In October 2018, I felt God starting to speak to me about this guy that I was working with on staff. I remember praying and fighting with God, telling him that my summer was absolutely crazy, and there's no way I can add anyone else to my already crazy life. I had to get me right first. I didn't want what God wanted for me because I was terrified. I started talking to my pastor, and he looked at me and just said, "Destiny, if God is prompting you to pray about this, you need to take it seriously." I rolled my eyes because I wanted nothing to do with it. Over the next few weeks, God was relenting, and he wouldn't let me forget about what he was speaking to me. Of course, I was annoyed, but I finally just said, "Whatever, I'll pray about it." For the next few weeks, I started seeking God about this potential relationship. He made it very clear to me that we would start dating. So for the next few months, I was praying that God would prepare my heart for this relationship and do something radical in me, because God knew something needed to change. In those few months, he definitely did something radical. In December, the week that I was praying and asking God to give this guy courage to ask me out, he asked me out and we started dating. I was pretty intense, and when we went out to talk about what God had been laying on our hearts as far as the relationship was concerned, I gave him a list of what my boundaries were, and I just told him my whole life story so that he knew what he was getting himself into. I wanted to give him the option to walk away first. I wanted to tell him that there was a potential that I could have Huntington's and develop symptoms over time, but I felt God so clearly tell me not to say anything about that. I knew 100% that God was in this relationship, and I was challenged daily to become more like Jesus through the example that this guy set. After a few months, life just started feeling heavy again for me. This guy and I were both wrestling with a lot of things interpersonally. My brother attempted suicide for the third time and was arrested, and my sister almost died from an infection. These two siblings were diagnosed with Huntington's, the very same disease my mom passed away from a few years prior. We also were wrestling with this tension of believing that the church was meant to look vastly different than it looked. We started talking about marriage pretty soon because we were dating with the intention to marry, and we both felt God was in this relationship. Then I started wondering about my future if I had Huntington's, and I wanted nothing to do with being in a relationship if I had Huntington's. I didn't want to ruin someone's life like that. So in March, I started going through the process of getting tested for Huntington's. I was terrified, yet I still felt peace about pursuing the process. In April, my results came back negative. I feel like I still haven't fully processed that because life has just been crazy. The guy I was dating was wrestling through different things, and I started noticing that he just wasn't acting himself. I told him that if he wanted to take a break, that I would be okay with that. He said he was okay, and we continued dating. In May, after the school year was over, he went home for a few days and came back and said he thinks that he needs to take a break. I was thankful because I think he needed it, but also I felt crushed and terrified of what the future would hold. In July, he went home for a month. We were still taking a break, and I told him there was no pressure to keep in touch with me. We didn't talk for the whole time. This guy that I thought for sure I was going to marry, I now had no idea if he'd even be in my life anymore. I was angry at God because he was behind us dating. I even told God no, and because I said yes and took the risk, I ended up getting hurt. When he came back from his month break, we met and caught up on life, and then he said that he wasn't looking at marriage right now, and he thinks it'd be best if we break up. It was the craziest thing because I responded, yeah, I feel like this is mutual, yet I had no idea what I meant by that. I guess since we were taking a break for so long, I was already grieving and expecting us to break up. After we broke up, I went to a parking lot and completely lost it. Like, those cries were just, it's bad, very bad. I realized in that moment that none of these things had to do with us breaking up, but everything to do with deeper roots that weren't healed in my life. I knew that this was God's grace in my life. At this point in time, I was wondering whether I was supposed to commit to another year on staff at this school I was working at, but I honestly just felt so burnt out. I was struggling to hold on and keep going. As I was just screaming at God, so confused and hurt, I felt this peace about the journey he was about to take me on. Just earlier this day, I moved from where I was living. I broke up with this guy I thought I was going to marry, and I felt like God was telling me to leave my job. My life just flipped upside down in a day's time. Yet, I felt like God was going to do something radical, and I felt immense peace. The next day, ironically, I had counseling, and for the first time in my life, I broke down and cried like I'd never had before. For the first time, I wasn't afraid of my tears, and I wasn't afraid of what my counselor thought. I cried, and I talked while crying, and by the time I left the session, I barely had a voice. I remember calling my aunt after counseling and crying on the phone with her, yet it was an extremely good cry. That was the first time in our relationship, over the years and years that we've been close, that I felt the freedom to be a crying mess. I started seeing Andrea every single week, never missing a week. She gave me a codependency workbook to work through, and the way that God used that to bring healing in my life is insane. My whole life, I felt psycho for feeling the things I was feeling, and in this workbook, I realized that a lot of what I was feeling was directly connected with the amount of trauma I went through as a kid. I started realizing that even in my relationship with this guy, I didn't feel like I was allowed to share what I thought, and I wasn't allowed to be angry. If there was something I felt like I needed to talk to him about, or if I was hurt in some way, it would take me almost an hour just sitting with him to muster out 3 words. I didn't know how to think for myself or speak up. When we broke up, I knew that it was a good thing because I realized the things I needed to work through, but I acted as if it wasn't a big deal and didn't hurt. I came home one day after church and lost it and realized I was extremely hurt, and quite frankly, I was angry. For the first time in my life, I felt like I was allowed to be angry. I knew I had to sit down with him and tell him how I felt. So I did. We met the last day we both had at Ground Zero, and I told him I felt used and angry. This was the first time I was owning up to what I was feeling and allowing myself to tell someone else that I was hurt by their actions. This was the first time I felt the right to be angry, and it was so freeing. I realized in my codependency book that I just wanted to please everyone else around me and act unfazed by things in life that were happening. The amount of things that God has used to speak to me to bring healing in the process has been insane. Just ask me. Although my life flipped upside down, God knew it was just what I needed to discover who he really was. I realized my concept of God was so skewed. I viewed him as a controlling God who just wanted to hurt me. oh, how I've discovered something so different in walking out this journey. This time has been a time for me to focus on my relationship with God more than I ever have before, and not feel guilt for not being involved in everyone's lives and everything going on around me. Everything I've been reading in Scripture, God has used to radically speak to me. At the beginning of this healing journey in August, I started reading through the story of David. First, how he was anointed king, yet he had to wait years and years for that to come to be. God had to do a work in his heart for him to be ready for the plans that he had for him. Fast forward to a story I read about a famine. It was when David was king, and there was a famine for 3 years, and David was pleading with God, why is this happening? Why is this happening? So God said there's blood guilt on Saul because of the Gibeonites. So then David went to the Gibeonites and said, I'll do anything that you ask of me. What do you want? And the Gibeonites said, we want 7 of Saul's sons. And this story just completely shook me, because the choices that Saul made affected future generations, and they had no control over it. And I realized in that moment, I connected the story of David becoming king and this story of future generations being affected. This time of waiting and this time of healing is saving future generations of my life from the things that I've had to go through. My boyfriend and I breaking up was definitely difficult, but I'm so completely humbled to have had the time with him that I did. He played such a huge role in my healing. I know that dating him and breaking up were 2 things that God used to bring immense healing to me. I realized so clearly that us breaking up wasn't God being harsh or trying to take away a dream from me. It was simply his grace coming in and saving a future marriage and future relationship with my kids. Oh, how much Jesus has changed me, and I'm forever grateful he intervened and allowed me to walk this journey of healing so that way I could have a healthier marriage and future. My life was unmanageable and out of control, and I had no idea how to change it. Last October, I started taking anxiety medicine. It wasn't something I wanted to do, and I fought it for a very long time, but I knew I had to do something before I did something drastic. I was still going to counseling at that point, but so much was going on with my job, family, and my own healing that I just couldn't manage. Fast forward a year and 2 months, I just went to the doctor almost a month ago to start weaning off of my medicine because I knew the anxiety and all the things I was feeling were symptoms of undealt with hurt and trauma. It's been a hard few weeks due to the symptoms, but I'm determined to get off this medicine so that I have another piece of my life to give God the glory in. It definitely would be easier to stay on the medicine than to deal with the awful side effects, but so would a lot of things in life. The Bible is clear that the way to Jesus is narrow, and not many people take that route, obviously because it is significantly harder, yet so worth it. After I left Ground Zero, I wasn't working for almost 2 months, and God used that as a season to show me that I really can trust him. He provided for my every need. Due to the hurt I'd experienced, I claimed I never wanted to get married or have kids. As I walked through significant healing, I realized that was all so deeply rooted in fear and insecurity. I didn't think I could get married because I didn't feel like I'd ever be able to measure up as a wife. I'd become just like my stepdad. I felt, and I didn't want someone to have to put up with me. I also realized, as I was working through the amends step in my book, that there was a deep-rooted guilt in my heart for the way that I treated my mom. I did the best I could to take care of her and grew very protective of her because I hated how other people treated her. Yet, because I never got a break and I was a kid, I lashed out in ways that made me feel like the worst human being alive. I was reminded of an instance when I was young where I was so overwhelmed with the weight of responsibility that I literally didn't know how I'd make it through another day. My days were like clockwork. Wake up, go downstairs to a counter full of mugs filled to the top with juice because my mom was thirsty. The mugs would be overflowing with juice, and I was the only one who would ever clean it up. So I'd go downstairs, clean everything up, frustrated that no one would even try to help, give my mom her medicine, try to get dressed for the day, and then get ready for school and try to focus long enough to get through the school day and try to take in what the teachers were trying to teach me. I'd reached the capacity of what I could handle, and I was over the top frustrated that my stepdad refused to try to get any kinds of help in the house for my mom. I was only a kid and couldn't provide her the care that she really needed. I was angry, and I felt desperate. I remember being so overwhelmed that I put Clorox in my mom's drink. Admitting that is one of the most humbling things I could do. When I talked about this in counseling, I then realized how much that guilt was eating me alive. I felt like a terrible daughter and couldn't believe that I essentially was trying to kill my mom. I wrote my mom a letter and took it to the gravesite and read it to her. Right after that, I went to my grandparents for my brother's birthday party, and my nieces were there. I was playing with them and started tearing up because I had this realization. I did want to be a mom, but I felt like I never could because I couldn't let go of that one incident with my mom. I felt like if I couldn't even care for my mom, why would I bring kids into this world and make them go through what I went through? I was reminded of that time when I went to Guatemala and shared my story for the first time about being sexually abused. There was a 20-year-old who shared her story. Her dad raped her and she got pregnant. She shared about how she was so angry about what happened to her that she tried to kill her son. My first reaction wasn't that she was a terrible person. My first reaction was complete heartbreak for her. Someone hurt her really bad and left her alone with that hurt. Not only that, but she was left with something, a son that would only remind her every day of the pain that was caused to her. I realized I couldn't beat myself up for something I did when I was a young kid. God not only forgave me, but he also gave me the power to share it so that others could understand the gospel. He died for us, for all of our sin. If we really do believe the word of God, we should be living differently and rejoicing in things he's forgiven us of and saved us from. I came to a point a few months ago where I made a promise to myself that I wouldn't hold any piece of my life from anyone. The Bible says we will overcome by the blood of the Lamb and the word of our testimony.
That's right.
Proverbs 18:1 says, whoever isolates himself seeks his own desire. He breaks out against all sound judgment. I realized I claimed to be a follower of Jesus, yet I didn't walk in his truth. I walked in isolation. I walked in fear. I realized all the years of prayers I had prayed that God would help me to surrender were finally starting to be answered. I let my whole heart be seen by him and others because of that, he brought healing to my whole heart. There are many who claim to follow and know Jesus, yet only take parts of his truth. I believe that Jesus died on the cross, rose again, and gave us victory to walk in freedom, joy, and healing. As his children, we are new creations. In order to be continually made new, we've got to let him chip away the old. Not that it's been an easy process, but the amount of freedom and joy that I'm experiencing now is the freedom and joy that he died to give us. Yet, it's as if a lot of times we think we know better and choose another way. Seeing what he's done in my life makes me so much more passionate to urge people to walk in the whole truth so that they can truly experience the love, joy, and freedom an innocent man died to give us. My testimony, like my cousin said, is that I am kept. With all the things I went through growing up, God protected me from being in dating relationships and giving myself up just to feel loved. He protected me from pornography. He protected me from getting caught up in drugs and alcohol just to try to escape. No matter how low I felt, he protected me, and somehow I clung to his love even when I didn't understand it. I believe he protected me from a future divorce and strained relationship with my future kids because by his grace, he intervened and showed me that in order to live in the joy and freedom he died to give me, I had to walk through intense healing to get there. He wasn't stealing my dreams. He was protecting them. I started babysitting for a little 9-month-old boy a few months ago, and as God has been bringing so much healing, I realized that my greatest desire is to be a wife and a mom, to walk in submission to my husband as he leads where he feels God is leading, to raise children up in the ways of God and instill in them the love and grace of God. I look around at the amount of broken families and see how a lot of that is because of the generational hurts caused by family members that were never healed from. All glory to God, he reached down, opened my eyes, and humbled me enough to walk through what was hard. My mindset was shaped by the way that I grew up. Everything was skewed. I grew up as a Christian yet didn't understand the gospel. There was a huge disconnect. Now as I've healed, I've realized the true love of God doesn't look like what I've seen growing up. Jesus is the Savior of the world, not me. I can look at things more objectively. I don't have to put such high expectations on myself to have it all together. And I'm not so trapped in fear that I can't speak up for myself. I've realized that for so long, I've been trying to force myself to be at this place where I so badly want to be. I want to be someone who loves well, has people over, celebrates everyone's birthdays, radiates Jesus, and through the way that I live my life, show others that they too are princesses and princes of the Most High King. God has just taken me back and reminding me of the story of David. There are things I have to work through in order to fully heal, and it's okay to be where I'm at right now. God isn't looking down on me because I'm not doing enough. He is proud of me simply for being. There's a grace I now have for myself because I understand the grace of God. Oh, the joy I have for the work that Jesus has done in my heart. I thought I had to have my life all figured out and do all these amazing things for God, but I felt all this pressure. It was hard to believe that pressure to do things for God was from God. When everything was stripped away, I realized I was the one putting pressure on myself to live up not only to my own expectations, but the expectations of others. Culture speaks so loudly about what we do and accomplish. As I've healed, I realize I honestly just want to follow Jesus and love others. It really can be that simple. The Bible tells us, love God and love others. I was extremely guarded and stubborn, and even just to say that I want to be a wife and a mom shows the immense healing Jesus has done in my heart. Ask anyone in this room who is here rooting me on. He wants our whole hearts, not just the pieces that are easy to give. The path is narrow, and there's a reason not many choose it. My challenge to all of us tonight is, what do you really believe about God? Are you a Christian because that's how you grew up, or are you a Christian because you fully believe and walk out the freedom and grace He died to give you? Before I wrap up, just wanted to share a little something that honestly is another way that God has brought me healing. In August, when my life started flipping upside down, there was this freedom I started feeling, and I started singing randomly. I thought to myself, maybe I should record this just in case. I started singing a chorus about Jesus making me new. I didn't think anything of it for a while. As I was doing my quiet time one day, God reminded me of those words I was singing and prompted me to share it with someone. I definitely did not want to share it. I'm insecure about the way that I sing, and I didn't want anyone to hear it. This was just for myself. I was not sharing this. God reminded me of the time where I decided I wouldn't hide anything from anyone and challenged me to allow Him to use this to further get the glory. So I sent this chorus to my friend Amy, and from there, she helped me turn it into a song. I had no idea this would turn into anything. I also had no idea when I was singing this chorus what the next few months would hold. Here I am today, having the opportunity to share my testimony and a song that I wrote that walks through just the wrestle that life was growing up. Just last year, my school would try to get me to sing in a mic, and I wanted nothing to do with it. Now, I just want to do whatever brings glory to God. Destiny aside,